All right, buckle up, everyone, because this time we're diving deep into the world of Chinese martial arts.
And it's a world with a long, fascinating history, full of myths, legends, and some truly incredible skills.
I'm talking centuries of tradition, philosophy, and yes, maybe even some epic fight scenes in our imaginations. But we're going deeper than just the surface level.
That's right, we're using the Wikipedia article on Chinese martial arts as our guide to uncover the details even some seasoned practitioners might not know about.
So, where do we even begin with a topic this huge?
Well, even the origins of Chinese martial arts are shrouded in mystery. We're talking myths and legends going back thousands of years. Did you know that even the legendary Yellow Emperor is connected to martial arts?
Wait, seriously, the Yellow Emperor, as in ancient China, emperor, not just some martial arts master with a fancy title.
The one and only. Legend has it, he wasn't just a ruler, but also a skilled warrior, even credited with inventing some fighting styles.
Okay, now that's just cool. But how much of that is actual history versus, really good stories people told?
That's the million-dollar question. The article makes it clear that solid historical evidence is hard to come by, especially that far back. But even if those stories about the Yellow Emperor battling mythical beasts are exaggerated, they still tell us something important.
They shaped how people saw martial arts. The discipline, the connection between mind and body, that's always been a part of it.
Precisely. These stories wove themselves into the philosophy of Chinese martial arts.
Yeah.
But we do eventually get to some hard historical facts. The Spring and Autumn Annals, for example, mention different fighting techniques way back in the 5th century BC.
So we're talking, what, over 2,500 years ago? That's before, well, pretty much everything.
And they even talk about hard and soft styles concepts still used today. It shows how deeply rooted these ideas are.
I love that, finding those ancient connections to what's still practiced today. That's what a deep dive is all about. And it reminds me we can't forget the military influence on Chinese martial arts.
Absolutely. The article mentions jiuli, a type of combat wrestling from the Qin dynasty. It even became a popular sport. Shows how these skills were valued both on and off the battlefield.
Which makes sense. A warrior culture like ancient China, their skills were essential. It wasn't just fighting, it was woven into their way of life.
Exactly. And speaking of integral parts of Chinese culture, we can't forget the Shaolin Temple.
Oh, I was waiting for this one. Legendary monks, incredible skills, the stuff of movies. But how much of that is real?
Well, the article sheds some light on their history. It talks about the founding of the temple in 495 AD by a monk named Buddhapadra, Batuo in Chinese. Apparently, his first Chinese disciples were already supposed to be amazing fighters.
See, now that's where things get blurry. Were they already martial arts masters before the temple, or is that part of the legend?
It's hard to say for sure. And then there's the story of Bodhidharma, an Indian monk who arrived at Shaolin a few decades later. He's often credited with bringing martial arts to the monks, right?
Right. But the article mentions that some of those stories might be from much later Ming Dynasty stuff.
Exactly. So how much of the Shaolin legacy is ancient, and how much was, shall we say, creatively embellished over time?
It's a real head scratcher. Did they fight bandits, like that old stone inscription suggests, or did the legend just grow over centuries? I guess that's a mystery for another deep dive.
It really makes you think, though, about all those different styles you see in movies and even in real life. It can get kind of confusing for people.
Right. It's like everyone calls it kung fu, but then you hear about all these animal styles and internal and external. It's a lot.
It really is. And the article clears up a common misconception right away. There's no single kung fu. It's more like this huge family of styles, each with its own lineage and approach.
Okay, that makes more sense. But with so many different styles, how do you even wrap your head around it all? Where do you even begin?
Well, the article talks about families, schools, and sects. Basically, think of them as branches of a giant martial arts tree, each one growing in its own direction over centuries. Pretty amazing to think about.
So you've got these masters passing down their knowledge, refining techniques, coming up with new ones. Man, that's how traditions stay alive, but also how they evolve. And that makes me think about those animal styles. You've got tiger style, crane style, snake style. It's like something straight out of a movie. But it's real, right?
Oh, it's totally real. The article calls them imitative styles, and they're based on the idea that you can learn a lot about fighting from observing animals.
Wait, seriously, like watching a tiger fight could give you tips on how to take down an opponent.
Exactly. It's about understanding how animals move, their strengths and weaknesses, and finding ways to apply those principles to your own techniques. It's like the ultimate form of biomimicry.
Okay, that is seriously cool. It makes you think about those ancient martial artists out there studying animals, trying to unlock the secrets of nature. So we've got all these different styles, but then there's also the whole northern versus southern thing. Is that literally just a geographical divide? Like north of this river, you get one style, south of it, you get another.
It's not quite that simple, although the article does mention a general division, with the Yangtze River often seen as the dividing line. Northern styles are often known for their long-range techniques, powerful kicks, those sorts of things.
And southern styles are more about close quarters combat, right? Lots of hand techniques, quick movements.
Yeah, but the article stresses that it's not a hard and fast rule. Over centuries, there's been plenty of mixing and influencing between styles.
So people move around, they share ideas, techniques get blended. That makes sense.
Exactly. And you have to wonder, did those geographical differences, like the terrain itself, maybe even the climate, did any of that affect how styles developed? An interesting thought.
Right. Like if you're in the wide open north, maybe those long range techniques are more practical, whereas in the south, with denser terrain, close quarters combat makes more sense. Fascinating. Okay, but what about the difference between internal and external styles? That's one I've never really grasped.
I can see why. It's one of those concepts that sounds kind of mystical, but it's actually pretty practical when you break it down.
Mm.
External styles often focus on developing things like raw power and speed. Think like really strong punches and kicks, that kind of thing.
Okay, so if external is about strength and speed, what's internal about?
It's still physical, but the emphasis shifts to cultivating and controlling your ki.
There's that word again, key. Everyone talks about it, but I feel like it means something different to everyone. What's your take on it?
Honestly, it's one of those things that can be tough to pin down. Even the article seems to dance around it a bit. Some people see it as this mystical energy, a life force. Others connect it more to things like breath control, efficient movement, being super aware of your body mechanics.
So less about magic powers, more about maximizing what your body can already do. Kind of like how Western martial arts talk about leverage, timing, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Think about a boxer slipping a punch, using his opponent's force against them. That's Kane in action, even if they wouldn't call it that. It's fascinating to see how those ideas pop up across different cultures.
For sure. But it seems like Chinese martial arts really connect those physical practices to mental and even spiritual ideas more explicitly than some other traditions.
Totally. And that brings us to what the article calls the 3 pillars of training basics, forms, and application. It's a really good framework for understanding the philosophy behind all those different styles.
All right, listeners, this is where we separate the casual kung fu fans from the serious students. We're going deeper into the philosophy. Hit us with those 3 pillars. All right, lay it on me. Basics, forms, application. 3 pillars, but what makes them so important in Chinese martial arts?
Well, think about it, basics, they're the foundation, right?
Yeah.
You might think, oh, just punches and blocks, boring. But it's so much more than that.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. It's about discipline, building that mind-body connection right from the start.
Exactly. And the article actually has this quote that sums it up perfectly. Train both internal and external. External training includes the hands, the eyes, the body, and stances. Internal training includes the heart, the spirit, the mind, breathing, and strength. Powerful stuff.
Wow, that's like ancient wisdom that's still totally relevant today. It's like they were way ahead of their time with this whole mindfulness thing.
Right. And, a big part of that internal training is meditation, something you see everywhere now, not just martial arts.
It's true, from athletes to like CEOs, everyone's trying to find that inner peace, that focus. Okay, so we've got the basics, the foundation, but what about those forms, those beautiful flowing movements? That's what always comes to mind when I think Chinese martial arts.
The forms are definitely eye-catching. But there's been some debate about whether they become a bit too focused on looking cool, Like how practical are those moves in a real fight?
Yeah, I always wondered about that, like those crazy spinning kicks you see in movies. Not sure how well that works if someone jumps you in a parking lot.
Right. But it's important to remember, those forms weren't designed for street fights. They were about preserving techniques, passing them down through generations. They trained both sides of the body, built muscle memory, balance.
So it's like even if you're not going to whip out a flying kick every day, the practice itself is building valuable skills. Kind of like calligraphy. You might not write a scroll every day, but the practice makes your handwriting better overall.
Exactly. It's about the process, the discipline, the artistry of it all. And that leads us to the last pillar, application. This is where it all comes together, the basics, the forms, putting it all into practice.
So this is where we finally get to the sparring, the real deal.
It is about sparring, but it's not always what you think. The article talks about pushing hands in internal styles. It's less about brute force, more about sensitivity, timing, redirecting your opponent's energy. Really fascinating stuff.
It's like they're playing chess with their bodies. I imagine the intensity of training really depends on the style, the teacher, all of that.
Absolutely. It's a whole spectrum, from light contact to, pretty intense sparring. But safety and respect are always key. And what's really interesting is how much crossover there is now between traditional Chinese martial arts and modern combat sports.
Right. You see it all the time. MMA fighters incorporating kung fu techniques. It's cool. It shows that these ancient styles still have something to offer in today's world. And speaking of today's world, we've got to talk about kung fu movies. They've had a huge impact, right?
No doubt. But before we go there, there's another aspect of Chinese martial arts influence we should touch on, the world of wuxia.
Wuxia. Okay, now we're talking flying swordsmen, epic battles, those classic stories.
Exactly. Think Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, pure wuxia. The article actually traces this genre back to ancient China, like way back to the 2nd or 3rd century BC.
Yeah.
By the Ming Dynasty, it was everywhere, influencing how people saw heroism and, of course, martial arts.
Makes sense. You grow up on stories about warriors with superhuman abilities. Of course, you're going to be fascinated by the real thing. And that fascination, it eventually landed on the big screen. And when it comes to kung fu movies, you got to start with the legend himself, Bruce Lee.
Absolutely. The article calls him an important icon of the 20th century, and it's true. His films, like Enter the Dragon, they weren't just action movies. They had this philosophy, this message of self-reliance that resonated with people.
And his fighting style, it was like lightning in human form. He blended Wing Chun with everything, fencing, boxing, you name it, Jeet Kune Do.
Yeah, Jeet Kune Do. It was all about adaptability, using whatever worked. Bruce Lee was about more than just fighting, though. He inspired a generation to see martial arts as a path to self-discovery.
And then you've got Jackie Chan, bringing the comedy, the incredible stunts, totally different vibe, but just as influential in his own way.
For sure. And Jet Li, Donnie Yen, so many amazing talents keeping that tradition alive. It's incredible how those films have captured the imagination of audiences worldwide. And here's a fun fact. Did you know there's even a connection between kung fu movies and hip-hop?
Wait, really? Now that's a mashup I wasn't expecting. Kung fu and hip-hop? How does that even work?
It's a trip. Those 70s kung fu films with their over-the-top action, the athleticism. The article mentions how they influenced early breakdancing and those dance battles you still see today.
Wow. That's wild to think about. It just goes to show you inspiration can come from the most unexpected places. This deep dive has been amazing. We started with ancient myths and ended up talking about Bruce Lee and hip-hop. It's clear that Chinese martial arts are about so much more than just fighting.
Totally. It's a window into Chinese culture, history, philosophy. It's about that connection between mind and body, pushing your limits, and it's still evolving even today.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? This journey through the world of Chinese martial arts is just beginning, and there are countless paths to explore. Whether it's through books, movies, or even stepping into a local school and trying a class, the world of Chinese martial arts has something for everyone. And who knows, maybe you'll discover your own inner warrior along the way.